All right. I thought I was live and I wasn't. Um, I probably will change this video. This is going to end up on Patreon. But I was talking about the encounter I had, and for me and for Zion's banner, it's not just about doing apologetics in the ivory tower. It's about taking it to the streets. Um, I learn more by hearing other people's objections when I actually get to hear their objections. And so, First Friday is a wonderful opportunity to meet every sort of creature theologically and worldview that exists. I mean, if you want to find a worldview, First Fridays in Arizona is the place to go because just about everything lives there. You have the Black Hebrew Israelites, we have the flat earthers are out there. Everything just kind of comes together on First Friday. And so it's such a great laboratory for an apologist. I mean, you will meet everything. Now, not everybody will talk to you. Now, you can see Marco there. Hey, special shout out to Nate, our first Patreon supporter. Go, Nate. And so I got to run into Marco. I'm still a little tired. I didn't get home till it was like 10:30, but I still wasn't feeling too well. Still kind of doing the Dramamine thing. And so, what a great conversation. And I met him through an atheist that was spouting and hating all over the place. And so, God didn't want me to talk to the atheist, even though I was interested. God wanted me to talk to Marco. And so Marco just he was so wonderful in thinking, and I complimented him in front of his girlfriend. I said, hey, look, you're a thinker. I love to listen to you think. Thank you for sharing your thinking with me. Let's go through some things together. And he asked really good questions. So be praying for Marco. He's a great guy, and I just wonderful conversationalist and a real thinker. And he was also very interested in Ashkenazi Jews. So it was funny when he found out I was Jewish and from Eastern Europe. And so Marco raised a few good questions. Let me just take one of them um, that he did indeed raise. He raised the issue of science. I didn't spend forever there, but I talked to him about what are called metaphysical goods because he asked me whether we were animals. That was a really hard question. I said, well, if by animal you mean from the Latin animos, which means to be able to move, and I'm a physical creature, I am a physical creature that moves as opposed to the tree across the street. So, in that sense, using the Latin for movement and indicating I'm a living creature, I guess I would say I'm an animal. But I said I'm uncomfortable with that definition. And then we started talking about consciousness. And I said, now, this is an interesting question. I'm glad you raised consciousness. And he asked whether consciousness could be an emergent feature of neurology, like we become so complicated we become conscious, emerging cognitive ability. And I said, well, I don't buy that. And I said, because no one has explained to me how immaterial, unconscious matter gives way to consciousness. Consciousness is a metaphysical good, just like justice and other things. And so I'm terribly uncomfortable with the idea of consciousness arising from matter because I don't see any mechanism, and you've moved from material to metaphysical issues. And I don't find metaphysical goods explained by material processes. So I said, I'm not, and he said, well, that's a good point. I mean, I never thought about that. How do matter, which is simply material, give way to consciousness, which is immaterial? And you can see that this young man was a thinker. And so we continued our conversation. Now, we hit a lot of different subjects. He wanted to understand the morality of the Old Testament versus the New. And so we spent a little time with that. That is a fascinating question. I've never taken time to do a YouTube on that yet um, directly. But I said I love to discuss the problem of evil because I have relatives that were Holocaust survivors. And so that's always been a big question in our family. And so I was really excited to discuss that with him a little. And I said, well, if you view the Old Testament as foundation, okay, if you have a good story, doesn't chapter 2 have information that chapter 1 didn't have? I mean, And he said, well, yeah, I could kind of see. So if you think of it as scenes in a play, the first scene sets up for the second scene. Some props are on the stage for the first scene that may not be on the stage for the second scene. So I'm not saying that the Hebrews were primitive. What I'm saying is that God laid foundation like you would in any good story. And I view the Bible as a great story. It's the greatest love story, as the source of all other stories. So wouldn't it make sense that if God was a good writer, he would lay the foundation for one chapter before the next chapter began? And he was trying to create a very specific sort of nation, a theocratic nation that was to function in certain ways to be a witness to other nations. So wouldn't you expect there to be some distinctions? Now, look what I'm doing. I'm using probability. If these conditions are true, would you not expect this result? And he agreed that he could see where I was coming from, and that made a certain amount of sense to him. And so he said, I'm not quite prepared to discuss the Old Testament, New Testament, that sort of detail. And I said, well, I sort of deal with those things all the time. And so I'm really glad you asked. And I'm glad you could see that it's plausible that that would be the case. And let's just say he provided some of the best, most fun stuff I've ever seen. Um, at the end of the day, and I hope I'm okay saying Marco because you don't know which Marco. I probably should have used M. But he's a great guy. So I hope to bump into him again. His girlfriend had been gone a while and he wanted to find her, and we had been talking for an hour plus. And so I ended up with just kind of the question that, if you had, at least, if we couldn't agree on everything in the Bible, if you had enough information to know that Jesus was indeed God who came to earth and died for your sin, would you be willing to accept him? If you had only that much to work with, would that be enough? And he said, well, I believe Jesus was a man. And I said, well, he doesn't really leave you that choice. He claimed to have a special relationship with God the Father and claimed to be God in the flesh, although he might not have done it the way some people would like. So he doesn't really leave you that choice. And Marco was unwilling to go there. That's not the important thing. The important thing is that Marco had to consider the claims of Jesus and got his answers question as to why the Christian view is a reasonable view. So we didn't do everything, but it was so good. It was just wonderful, and it kept me out later. But it's the sort of thing that I and Zion's Banner sort of does. We bring the answers forward, and then we take them out to the laboratory where real people live. And so may God give me many more opportunities and additional venues. But I'm so grateful for Marco for spending some time to think with me at 105 degrees. I'm getting used to the temperature a little better. Although I admit when I came home, I was like guzzling water. But so this is just great. And so I wanted to share this with the little community, and I will post this on Patreon. And I'm glad for you guys that tuned in. But here's a live report from the laboratory, and you can just see that this is like the exciting stuff for me. This is the stuff. God gave me the one conversation, and God did above it and beyond anything I could have imagined with a great conversation with Marco. So this is exciting. And I don't always get Marcos. Sometimes I get the angry atheist. But when I get a Marco and I get an opportunity like that, it's gold to me. So, well, you guys that are tuning in live feed will see this and I will post this. But we do the stuff on air and then we take it out. And I wanted you to see that, this stuff really applies to evangelism. Someone said the problem is that apologetics gets separated from evangelism. You have a lot of apologists that don't go out and do it. And then you got guys that go out and do it, but they're not real into apologetics. I love it when I can wed the two. So Hey, shout out to Roxby. Shout out to Nate. Shout out to you guys that tuned in. Yes, Patreon and then the slash and then Zion's banner is up and running. And I am already thinking of skits and maybe podcasts and other things that I can do, as well as testing it out there. So thanks for tuning in. It's just a little update, but there it is. God did apologetics last night, and I was there. So